Welcome back to Wisdom for Modern Living. In a world that glorifies ambition and constant pursuit, few voices sound more quietly revolutionary than that of Confucius. More than 20,500 years ago, in an age of chaos, political corruption, and moral decay, he walked through the villages of ancient China teaching one simple truth: that happiness and harmony are not found in wealth, power, or fame, but in the cultivation of virtue and the art of living rightly. He did not speak of happiness as a fleeting emotion or as the satisfaction of desire. For Confucius, happiness was not something to chase, but something that naturally arises when one lives in accordance with truth, respect, and integrity, what he called the way of humanity. He believed that to bring peace to the world, one must first bring peace to the family. To bring peace to the family, one must first bring order to the self. And to bring order to the self, one must first purify the heart. In this chain of wisdom lies his entire vision for human happiness. It begins not from the outside world, but from the inner world of character. He once said, "The man who moves a mountain begins by carrying away small stones." To Confucius, happiness was built not through grand actions, but through small, consistent acts of virtue. Yet in the modern world, we are taught the opposite. We are told that happiness comes from achievement, from reaching goals, buying more, winning more, proving more. We measure joy by what we have, not by who we are. And so we rush, we compare, we compete, all the while wondering why peace feels so distant. Confucius would look at our world and smile gently. He would say, "The superior man is calm and at peace. The inferior man is always full of anxiety." He would not mean this as judgment, but as an observation that inner stillness is the fruit of moral clarity. When your actions, words, and intentions are aligned, your mind becomes still, like a lake without ripples. But when your words say one thing, your heart another, and your actions something else, you create inner conflict, and that conflict becomes suffering. The foundation of Confucian happiness, then, is harmony. Harmony between thought and action. Harmony between self and others. Harmony between humanity and heaven, the moral order of the universe. He called this order Li, the principle of proper conduct, not as a set of rules, but as a rhythm that connects every human heart. Li is not about formality, it is about awareness. It is the recognition that everything we do, how we speak, how we eat, how we treat others, carries the potential to create either discord or harmony, and happiness, in his view, blooms wherever harmony is practiced. For Confucius, to be truly happy is to live beautifully, to speak truthfully, to act kindly, to respect elders, to honor family, to serve society. He said, "To practice 5 things under all circumstances constitutes perfect virtue: gravity, generosity of soul, sincerity, earnestness, and kindness." He believed that moral beauty is not a constraint, it is liberation. Because when your conscience is clean, your heart is light. You no longer have to hide, to justify, to manipulate. You become free from guilt, free from inner conflict, free from the need to impress. And in that freedom, joy arises naturally, a quiet, steady happiness that does not depend on praise or success. Confucius himself lived through poverty and political failure. He was dismissed by rulers, betrayed by students, misunderstood by his peers. But he never grew bitter. He once said, "The superior man is distressed by his own lack of ability, not by the failure of others to recognize him." He found contentment not in how the world treated him, but in how he treated the world. This is perhaps the most radical part of his teaching, that happiness does not come from what happens to you, but from what happens within you. It is a happiness that cannot be stolen because it does not depend on circumstance. He said, "When we see men of a contrary character, we should turn inwards and examine ourselves." In other words, do not let others disturb your peace. The behavior of others is their lesson. Your reaction to it is yours. Instead of judging or blaming, Confucius asks us to reflect. Where does my heart stand? What can I learn from this? That is the mark of a wise person. They turn conflict into understanding and misunderstanding into compassion. They do not demand perfection from the world. They cultivate goodness within themselves. Confucius believed that the highest form of happiness comes from virtue, and the highest virtue is ren, often translated as benevolence or human-heartedness. It is the spirit of kindness, empathy, and compassion that connects all beings. He said, "To be able to practice 5 things everywhere under heaven constitutes perfect virtue, and the greatest of them is love." Ren is not sentimental love. It is moral love, a recognition that the happiness of others is bound to our own. When you act with Ren, you live with an open heart. You see the suffering of others and respond not with pity, but with respect. You listen before you speak. You understand before you judge. You forgive before you condemn. This is how Confucius taught happiness, not through pleasure, but through the dignity of the soul. He said, "The noble man finds joy in virtue. The small man finds joy in comfort." The noble man's joy is quiet, steady, and enduring, like a flame that never goes out. The small man's joy is loud, restless, and fleeting, like a spark that burns bright, then dies. One is born of depth, the other of distraction. Today, many seek happiness by changing circumstances, new jobs, new relationships, new cities. Confucius would gently remind us that happiness is not found by moving away from discomfort, but by cultivating peace within discomfort. He said, "Wherever you go, go with all your heart." Meaning, presence is happiness. When your whole heart is in what you do, whether it is sweeping the floor, speaking to a friend, or sitting in silence, peace becomes your companion. Confucius lived in times of turmoil, yet he believed that peace was always possible. He said, "Virtue is not left to stand alone. He who practices it will have neighbors." By this, he meant that goodness creates resonance. One act of virtue inspires another. One kind word ripples outward like circles in water. Happiness spreads not by preaching, but by example. Imagine a world where people practiced Ren, where kindness was not strategy, but nature, where leaders ruled with humility, not arrogance, where families honored one another with gentleness. Confucius believed such a world was not a dream. It was simply the natural result of people living with sincerity. He said, "To see what is right and not do it is the want of courage." True happiness requires courage. The courage to do what is right even when it is difficult. The courage to be honest when lies are easier. The courage to forgive when hatred feels justified. Because every act of integrity strengthens the heart, and a strong heart is a joyful heart. The path of Confucius is not easy. It requires patience, humility, and constant self-reflection. But in walking it, you discover a happiness that the world cannot give and cannot take away. He said, "He who conquers himself is the mightiest warrior." Because when you conquer yourself, your pride, your anger, your greed, you no longer live as a slave to emotion. You become free, and that freedom is happiness. For Confucius, the cultivation of happiness was not an escape from duty, it was the fulfillment of it. He saw the self not as isolated, but as a link in a vast chain of relationships, to parents, to friends, to society, to heaven. And harmony in these relationships brings joy to all. He said, when the root is in order, the branches will flourish. When the self is right, the world begins to align. That is why he placed so much importance on personal cultivation, because happiness radiates outward. The peace of one heart becomes the peace of a family. The peace of a family becomes the peace of a community. And the peace of a community becomes the peace of the world. In the Analects, his disciples asked, "Is there one word that can guide a person throughout life?" He answered, "Reciprocity. Do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself." This golden rule, older than almost any other moral teaching, is the root of all happiness. When we live with empathy, we dissolve the illusion of separation. We realize that our joy is intertwined with the joy of others. That is the heart of Confucian wisdom, happiness through humanity. He said, "The virtuous man is drawn to virtue because it is his nature, just as water flows downward." In other words, happiness does not require striving when it becomes your nature to be kind, honest, and compassionate. When goodness flows effortlessly, happiness follows naturally. But this flow cannot begin without reflection. Confucius said, by 3 methods we may learn wisdom. First, by reflection, which is noblest. Second, by imitation, which is easiest. And third, by experience, which is bitterest. To reflect is to see yourself clearly, to admit mistakes, to learn humbly, to grow sincerely. It is through self-knowledge that the seeds of joy are planted. Confucius never promised that virtue would bring success. He only promised it would bring peace. He said, to know what is right and not do it is the want of courage. For him, peace was not the absence of challenge, but the presence of moral strength. The modern world often separates happiness from morality, as if joy and virtue are unrelated. But Confucius saw them as inseparable, for happiness without virtue is fleeting, while virtue without joy is incomplete. A truly good person, he said, is joyful by nature, not because life is easy, but because their heart is at rest. He said, the superior man is dignified but not proud. The small man is proud but not dignified. The superior man's happiness is quiet. It comes from the knowledge that he lives in harmony with the way. And so, even after 2.5 millennia, Confucius still speaks to us. He reminds us that happiness is not something to be found, but something to be remembered. It lives in the space between gratitude and kindness, between self-awareness and simplicity. It lives wherever virtue is practiced sincerely. In a modern world filled with ambition, noise, and comparison, his voice returns like a gentle wind from the past, whispering, "Be kind, be sincere, be humble. In this, you will find peace." In the teachings of Confucius, happiness is not an emotion that arrives by chance. It is a natural outcome of living in alignment with the moral order of the universe. He often spoke of the 4 virtues that form the foundation of a good and peaceful life. Ren, benevolence; Li, proper conduct; Yi, righteousness; and Ji, wisdom. Together, they are like the 4 corners of a house. Remove one, and the structure begins to crumble. But when all are strong, they create a dwelling where the spirit can finally rest in harmony. The first and greatest of these virtues is Ren, often translated as benevolence, compassion, or human-heartedness. But Ren is more than kindness. It is the deep awareness that we are all part of the same human family. When Confucius spoke of Ren, he was not referring to sentimental love, but to the profound respect that arises when one sees others not as objects to be used, but as beings to be understood. He said, "To love others is to begin with oneself, because true compassion begins in self-cultivation. A heart clouded by greed or anger cannot see the suffering of others clearly. Only when we discipline our own minds, when we cultivate patience, empathy, and humility, can we extend genuine care." In modern life, we often mistake compassion for weakness, as if to be kind means to be naive. But Confucius knew that compassion is the highest strength. He said, "The benevolent man is invincible." Why? Because nothing can wound a person whose heart is full of understanding. Anger cannot cling to him. Jealousy finds no place to root. Hatred fades before his calm. To live with Ren is to act with a sense of shared humanity. It means recognizing that every person we meet, from the beggar to the king, walks their own difficult path. It means meeting arrogance with patience, ignorance with wisdom, cruelty with gentleness. And it means asking not, "What can I get from this world?" but "What can I give to it?" Such a mindset transforms not only individuals, but entire societies. Confucius taught that when rulers govern with Ren, people naturally follow their virtue. When leaders lead with greed, chaos follows. He said, "He who rules by virtue is like the North Star. It remains in its place, while all other stars turn toward it." The same is true for each of us. When we anchor ourselves in virtue, others feel that stability and respond with trust. The second virtue is Li, often translated as ritual, propriety, or correct behavior. To modern ears, ritual may sound rigid, but for Confucius, Li was not about empty ceremony. It was about awareness in action. It is the way we express respect through daily life, how we greet, how we speak, how we listen. It is mindfulness in human form. In ancient China, Li referred to the rites that maintain social harmony, honoring parents, showing respect to teachers, behaving with courtesy to others. But its essence remains timeless. Every act, no matter how small, carries meaning. When done with sincerity, the simplest gesture, a bow, a word, a smile, becomes sacred. Confucius said, when a man's acts are in accordance with Li, his every movement is beautiful. This does not mean we must follow rigid rules. It means our actions should reflect inner harmony. To practice Li is to bring order to chaos, gentleness to conflict, and respect to every exchange. In our modern world, where speed and self-centeredness often dominate, Li reminds us to slow down and honor connection, to look into another's eyes when we speak, to listen without interruption, to be mindful of our tone, our presence, our effect on others. Happiness, Confucius would say, begins in such small courtesies, for when we treat others with respect, the world begins to mirror that respect back to us. He said, "Respect yourself and others will respect you." It is not pride he speaks of, but dignity, the quiet confidence that arises when we live in integrity. The third virtue is Yi, righteousness, or moral courage. It is the strength to choose what is right, even when it costs us. It is the refusal to compromise principle for comfort, to trade integrity for gain. Confucius said, "The superior man understands what is right, the inferior man understands what is profitable." In our age, where success is often measured by wealth and power, Yi feels almost revolutionary. It reminds us that happiness built on dishonor is fragile, that peace cannot coexist with deceit. A clear conscience is worth more than 1,000 victories. He told his students, "The noble man is not worried about poverty, but about losing the way." Meaning, as long as one lives with righteousness, even hardship becomes meaningful. The unjust man may have riches, but he has no peace. For peace cannot be bought. It can only be earned through integrity. Yi demands courage, not the loud, violent courage of battle, but the quiet bravery of moral choice. It is the courage to admit when we are wrong, the courage to speak truth even when others remain silent, the courage to forgive instead of revenge. He said, "To see what is right and not do it is the want of courage," and he lived by these words. When corrupt rulers sought to use him for political gain, he walked away, choosing poverty over compromise. He would rather go hungry than betray virtue. And though he died without power, he lived with peace. For he understood that the true victory of life is to remain unbroken in spirit. The fourth virtue is Ji, wisdom. To Confucius, wisdom was not about knowledge, but about understanding life with clarity. He said, by 3 methods we may learn wisdom: by reflection, which is noblest; by imitation, which is easiest; and by experience, which is bitterest. Wisdom begins when we learn to look inward, when we stop blaming others and start observing our own minds. Wisdom is the light that guides Ren, Li, and Yi. Without wisdom, even kindness can mislead, even righteousness can become pride. Wisdom sees beyond the surface. It discerns the heart of a situation, not just its appearance. In a world overflowing with information, we often confuse intelligence with wisdom. But knowledge fills the mind. Wisdom empties it. Knowledge makes us clever. Wisdom makes us kind. Knowledge seeks to control. Wisdom learns to flow. Confucius said, "The wise are free from confusion, the virtuous from anxiety, the brave from fear." When we act with wisdom, confusion fades because our choices align with what is right. Anxiety fades because we no longer chase approval. Fear fades because we see that every experience is a teacher. He often told his students to seek teachers everywhere. 3 people walking together, one of them must be my teacher, he said. To be wise is to remain humble enough to learn from everyone, even from those who disagree with us, even from our enemies, even from our mistakes. He believed that self-cultivation, the daily practice of reflection, correction, and compassion, was the true path to happiness. He said, when you know a thing, to hold that you know it, and when you do not know a thing, to allow that you do not know it. This is knowledge. In his humility, there was joy, because humility opens the door to growth, while arrogance closes it. When Ren, Li, and Ji work together, the result is a life of balance, a mind that is calm, a heart that is pure, a spirit that is unshaken. Such a person, Confucius said, becomes a junzi, a noble person, not noble by birth or wealth, but by character. The junzi is gentle but firm, humble but confident, patient but wise. He is at peace because he lives according to the way, not the way of ambition, but the way of harmony. The junzi understands that happiness is not something to pursue, but something to express. When you live with integrity, compassion, and wisdom, happiness is simply the fragrance that your life gives off, like the scent of a flower that needs no effort to spread. Modern people often ask, how can I find happiness? Confucius would answer, cultivate virtue. Because when virtue becomes your foundation, happiness follows as naturally as dawn follows night. He said, is it not a pleasure to study and practice what you have learned? To him, joy came from constant refinement, not from the desire to be perfect, but from the joy of progress itself. He found happiness in the journey, not the destination. For him, the process of learning, improving, and aligning with the way was itself the source of fulfillment. When he spoke of the way, or Tao, he did not mean a religion, but a rhythm of life. It is the natural moral order, the harmony that connects heaven, earth, and humanity. When we live in accordance with it, our hearts rest easily. When we stray from it, unrest follows. He said, at 15, I set my heart upon learning. At 30, I stood firm. At 40, I had no doubts. At 50, I knew the will of heaven. At 60, my ear was obedient. At 70, I could follow my heart's desire without transgressing what was right. In this reflection, he revealed the map of a peaceful life, a journey from confusion to understanding, from striving to trust. Confucius was not offering rules, but a way of being, a path of refinement through every stage of life. He believed that happiness grows as we grow, that joy matures alongside virtue. When we are young, we seek excitement. When we are wise, we seek peace. And that peace is not something found in the absence of struggle, but in the presence of purpose. So much of modern unhappiness, Confucius would say, comes from losing sight of purpose. We chase pleasure, but not meaning. We accumulate possessions, but forget gratitude. We perfect our outer image, but neglect our inner truth. He would remind us gently, the superior man thinks of virtue, the small man thinks of comfort. When virtue becomes our compass, every step becomes peaceful. He would also remind us that happiness is relational. It grows in the soil of respect, sincerity, and gratitude. He said, filial piety and brotherly respect are the root of humanity. Meaning, joy begins at home, in how we treat those closest to us. No one can claim to love humanity while neglecting their parents or despising their neighbors. For Confucius, happiness begins in everyday virtue, in the warmth of a family meal, like the patience of listening, the gratitude of serving. When the home is filled with kindness, society becomes peaceful. When society is just, the world prospers. The ripple begins in one heart, yours. The more we study Confucius, the more we see that his path to happiness is not outdated, it is desperately needed. In an age of noise, he offers silence. In an age of greed, he offers contentment. In an age of division, he offers harmony. And perhaps this is his greatest teaching of all, that happiness is not about changing the world to suit our desires, but changing ourselves to harmonize with what is right. When the heart is right, the world follows. When the heart is wrong, no amount of success can make it right. So cultivate Ren. Let kindness be your nature. Practice Li. Let respect guide your actions. Embody Yi. Let integrity be your foundation. Seek Ji. Let wisdom light your path. And then, Confucius would say, happiness will not need to be found. It will find you. In the modern world, the voice of Confucius might seem quiet, too gentle, too slow for an age that runs on ambition and noise. And yet, the older our world becomes, the more his wisdom feels like the medicine we forgot we needed. For what he offered was not a set of doctrines, but a way of living, a rhythm of being human with grace. He taught that true happiness is not found in wealth, pleasure, or power, but in balance. Balance between doing and being, speaking and listening, striving and resting, giving and receiving. And that balance begins not in the world, but in the heart. Confucius said, the superior man seeks within himself, the inferior man seeks in others. These words, though ancient, could have been spoken yesterday. We live in an age of comparison, constantly measuring our worth against others. We compare jobs, homes, looks, followers, and forget that joy cannot grow in the soil of envy. The moment you look outward for validation, peace disappears. But the moment you look inward, peace returns. To seek within yourself is not selfish. It is the only path to authenticity. Because happiness is not imitation, it is alignment. When your life reflects your values, when your words match your heart, when your choices honor what you know is right, you feel whole. And in that wholeness, joy quietly blooms. He said, isn't it a pleasure to study and practice what you have learned? Confucius found joy in the act of learning, not for achievement, but for self-cultivation. For him, to learn was not to fill the mind, but to refine the soul. He understood that happiness grows in the same way a tree grows, slowly through seasons of patience, discipline, and care. Modern life, however, tempts us to believe that happiness is instant, a product, a click, a reward. We chase experiences to fill emptiness, but the more we chase, the further we drift from contentment. Confucius would remind us, to be wealthy and honored in an unjust society is a disgrace, because when happiness depends on externals, it cannot last. But when it grows from virtue, it endures through every storm. He said, when you see a worthy person, think of becoming their equal. When you see an unworthy person, examine yourself. It is a profound teaching in humility. Happiness is not about feeling superior, but about seeing every encounter as a mirror. Each person you meet reveals something about you, your patience, your prejudice, your compassion. If you can use those reflections wisely, the world itself becomes your teacher. The beauty of Confucius's path is that it turns life into a moral art. Happiness is not a feeling to chase, but a skill to practice, like music or calligraphy. Each act of kindness is a stroke of the brush, each honest word a note in the melody. With time, the harmony grows richer, until one day your entire life becomes a work of art, calm, balanced, and true. But Confucius also warned, this harmony cannot exist without discipline. He said, the expectations of life depend upon diligence. The mechanic that would perfect his work must first sharpen his tools. If happiness is the sculpture, virtue is the chisel. We must refine ourselves daily, not with harshness, but with sincerity. To him, self-cultivation was not punishment, but freedom. Because the one who governs himself needs no one to govern him. The one who disciplines his desires becomes their master, and the one who aligns with the way becomes unshakable. He once said, "The green reed which bends in the wind is stronger than the mighty oak which breaks in a storm." The wise do not resist life, they flow with it. They adapt without losing integrity, just as water takes the shape of the vessel, yet remains itself. That is the secret to lasting happiness: flexibility without corruption, strength without hardness. He also believed that happiness grows from gratitude, from recognizing the goodness already present in life. He said, when we see men of worth, we should think of equaling them. When we see men of contrary character, we should turn inward and examine ourselves. In other words, the path to happiness is not comparison, but appreciation. Each challenge teaches resilience. Each person, whether kind or cruel, teaches wisdom. Every moment offers something to learn, and the learner is never unhappy. In our modern pursuit of happiness, we often forget that joy and duty can coexist. Confucius saw no contradiction between responsibility and peace. In fact, he believed that true joy comes from fulfilling one's duty, not as a burden, but as an act of love. To care for one's parents, to raise children with kindness, to serve one's community with sincerity. These to him were sacred acts. He said, filial piety and brotherly respect are the root of humanity. When the roots are deep, the tree of happiness cannot wither. Modern culture teaches independence, but Confucius taught interdependence. We are threads in a vast fabric of relationships: family, friends, society, nature, heaven itself. When one thread is pulled, the whole cloth trembles. To live in harmony is to recognize this web of connection and act with care. Happiness is not isolation, it is belonging. It is the quiet joy of knowing that your life supports the lives around you. He also taught the importance of moderation. The superior man does not seek to satisfy his appetite, nor to live in luxury. He is diligent in affairs and careful in speech. Excess, whether of pleasure or ambition, disturbs the balance. When you want too much, you lose the ability to enjoy what you already have. But moderation restores clarity. When you eat with mindfulness, work with sincerity, rest with gratitude, every act becomes sacred. This is the essence of Zhongyang, the doctrine of the mean, one of Confucius's most subtle teachings. It is not about mediocrity but harmony, the ability to stay centered amidst extremes. When you succeed, remain humble. When you fail, remain calm. When praised, remain grounded. When criticized, remain composed. Such steadiness, he said, is the mark of the wise and the secret to enduring peace. The person who masters the mean lives like a tree rooted deep in the earth. The winds of fortune may blow, but they cannot uproot him, because his happiness is not built on chance, but on character. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of the modern age is that we have mistaken stimulation for happiness. We flood our senses, yet starve our souls. We collect pleasures, but lose peace. Confucius's wisdom calls us back to simplicity, to rediscover contentment in quiet moments. He said, life is really simple, but we insist on making it complicated. True joy, then, is not in adding more, but in needing less. A cup of tea shared with a friend, a moment of silence before dawn, a small act of honesty when no one is watching. In these simple moments, the heart remembers what happiness truly feels like. The teachings of Confucius are not confined to temples or texts. They are meant to be lived. Every smile you give, every word you speak with kindness, every promise you keep, that is Confucian practice. Happiness grows in the soil of daily life, not in grand philosophies. He once said, "To see what is right and not do it is the want of courage." Happiness demands that courage, to live your truth even when it's difficult. because there is no peace in pretending and no joy in betrayal of one's heart. Integrity is the quiet joy that needs no applause. Confucius never claimed to have all the answers. He simply walked the path of learning until the end of his days. He said, "At 70, I could follow my heart's desire without transgressing what was right." That is the final stage of wisdom, when right action and joy become one, when morality is no longer a discipline, but a natural expression of being. To live that way is to be free, free from the tug of desire, free from the sting of regret, free from the burden of pretense. This is the happiness Confucius taught, not fleeting pleasure, but enduring harmony. If he were alive today, he might look at our world full of noise and haste and simply slow down, return to virtue, return to yourself. Because when you return to yourself, the self that is honest, kind, and wise, the search for happiness ends. The heart becomes peaceful, the mind clear, the world gentle again. So perhaps the secret Confucius left us is this: happiness is not something to find, it is something to become. And to become happy, one must become good. Not good by others' standards, but by the quiet knowing of one's own conscience. When you live this way, joy ceases to be a destination and becomes a constant companion. It walks beside you in ordinary days, it hums softly in your heart through loss and change. And when you look back, you will see that every step, every challenge, every reflection, every act of goodness was leading you here, to peace. The peace that Confucius called day, inner virtue, the radiance of a life lived in truth. It is the kind of peace that does not depend on others, that cannot be shaken by the winds of time. It is quiet, yet powerful, like a candle that lights others without losing its own flame. So take a moment now to breathe deeply, to let go of striving, to feel the simple dignity of being alive. Because in that breath, you touch the wisdom of Confucius, the wisdom that says happiness is not out there, but right here in the purity of your heart. And when you live from that place, calm, kind, sincere, you carry the peace of 2,500 years of wisdom into the modern world. You become the bridge between the ancient and the present, between chaos and stillness, between humanity and heaven. That is what Confucius can teach us about happiness, that it was never lost, we only needed to remember. So as we close this reflection, take a quiet moment to breathe, to return to yourself. Remember, happiness is not found in chasing the world, but in cultivating the heart. Confucius taught that when the heart is right, the world becomes peaceful. And perhaps that is where happiness has been waiting all along, not in what you possess, but in who you choose to be. If this message touched something within you, if it brought a little peace, a little clarity, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who may need a breath of stillness today, and subscribe to Wisdom for Modern Living. Together, we can keep these ancient teachings alive, not just as words from the past, but as a light for our modern world. One breath, one story, one act of awareness at a time. Thank you for listening. May your mind be calm, your heart be kind, and your spirit be free.